leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. We're going to try to do three things tonight. One, I'm going to spend a few minutes sort of talking about folklore. I've tried this a couple times. It hasn't worked, but, you know, hope springs eternal. Sort of walk through some of the comments you get and try to explain, and maybe they're bots, maybe they're made up, but what reality is. The second thing, we're going to walk through the borrowing numbers off the Treasury's website so they're up to date on what's actually happening, and I need to do it over and over and over and over because I'm trying to get this place to understand how fast the numbers are moving away from us. And number three, we're going to do some thought experiments. I'm going to show you some ideas and technology that actually could fairly substantially change the borrowing and debt curve. Okay, first off, for some of the folks, last week, I appreciate Forbes put up on YouTube the last week's floor speech. I think now it has 640,000 people that have viewed it. Wonderful. But then you read some of the comments, and you accept half the comments are from Russian troll farms or Chinese troll farms or Iranian troll farms or they're bots, so it's just lunacy. But every once in a while you get the person that says, why aren't there any people in the chamber? They're not supposed to be here. The work of the day is done. Now we do our floor speeches. Right now they belong in some evenings. They're still in committee till late at night. It's right now, what, 7:30 here in Washington. If they're hanging out here, they should be in their offices reading. But one of the reasons you do these presentations, I do them, is you're probably on 1,000 televisions around this campus right now. And maybe there's some staffers who all of a sudden are willing to listen to math. Remember our running joke, this is a math-free zone? Second thing, and I'm just going to do this one because I'm tired of people that don't think. Stop being trite. The scale of the debt problem is real. And whether you're on the left or the right, you have to understand the solutions we move our mouths about saying, we can raise taxes on rich people. And you get about 1.5% of GDP, but you're borrowing about 9.6. And those of us who want to cut things, we got to be honest. I can find you 1.5%, 2% of cuts. But if you're borrowing 9.6% of GDP, which we are this year, you're not really moving the needle. So one of the comments, just to understand how absurd and how stupid, excuse me, that's not fair. I take that back. I apologize. Please take this seriously. So when you have the person that says, and maybe it was a bot, and you see in the comments 20, 30 times, you know, if you just got rid of congressional salaries, we're probably overpaid for our work product. In an entire year, every U.S. senator, every member of the House, get rid of their salaries. It would cover 16 minutes of borrowing in an entire year. In a day, it would cover 2.6 seconds of borrowing. But this is what we call it's fun rhetoric and it's stupid math. And when you have someone willing to say things like that, it once again shows you're not willing to understand the scale that's moving against this country. Remember, over and over and over and over, it's debt that has crushed republics. So let's actually go through some of the other math, and then there's a number of things we're going to go through here, just trying to understand how absurd what's going on is. So I grabbed The Economist magazine, wonderful magazine. It's a little liberal, little European-centric, but you see their cover. Their cover is trying to make the point is we have actually a remarkably healthy economy considering all the stupid that's gone on. Yet, what does it mean to you when magazines like this are actually doing covers saying, well, the amazing American economy, it's still growing, and yet at the same time, Last week I was here and told you we were borrowing over 95,000 a second. Now it's no longer 95,000. It's 98, I think 300 a second. If we try a little harder, maybe we'll get over 100,000 a second. If you go over the last 365 days, as of today, we're borrowing over 98,000 a second. And almost every dime of that growth in borrowing is interest and different types of health care. And yet, when we look at these, I keep trying to explain over and over and over every dime. So think of this as just, and this is a more update version. So here's what we call discretionary. You see there in the blue or purple, whatever that color is, about half of that's defense. About half of that is everything you think of as government. It's the FBI, it's the Park Service, it's everything else. It's other than mandatory earned benefits. Every dime a member of Congress votes on is borrowed. All defense is borrowed. All discretionary is borrowed. And we're heading towards a time where we may actually see, and this is off, if we actually get close to 2.8 trillion and all discretionary is about 2, start thinking that. When you start having another $800 billion of Medicare, of things of that nature borrowed, shouldn't that actually start to create a little sense of stress, panic? Are we going to continue to play the game around here where the left lies saying, we can raise taxes, and then we do stupid things like, well, if we got rid of foreign aid, yes, it would take care of a whole week or so of borrowing. What I'm asking for is to think with a calculator. We have to change policies in a big-time way to save this country. And it's going to be complex. It's going to be hard. You're going to have to read and read and read and understand. But there is hope. I can show you over and over. I've come to this floor and said, if you do these things, you can crash the price of healthcare. If you adopt these technologies, you can crash the price of this government. And yet these hallways around here are full of people that they're not here to help us cut spending. They're here to help us, but actually help themselves. They want money. They want to either defend their bureaucracies or they want to defend their business models, and they use Congress as a barrier to entry. So let's walk through some more of this. Hand that to you. So one of my other frustrations is, how do you plan? So last May, when we were supposed to be building the 2024 budget, a year ago May, and we're going to vote on some of the rest of it this week, which shows you how dysfunctional we've been, but we were too busy trying to get rid of a speaker. And think of this. In that time, we were fighting over like $16 billion. We're borrowing about $9 billion a day. So we've gone how many months, and we never got around to actually working on the real problems because the theatrics are around here. So the Congressional Budget Office last year said, hey, we may only borrow $1.744 billion. And I like to use gross numbers instead of publicly borrowed. And over here, when you borrow from the trust funds, because you got to pay them back, and we do pay interest to the trust funds. So when you borrow out of Social Security, borrow out of the Medicare Part A trust fund, when you borrow out of transportation, we do borrow that money right out, goes to Treasury, goes out the door, and then we give them sort of Treasury note IOUs with interest. And then OMB, Office of Management and Budget, last June said, hey, we're only going to borrow $1.988 trillion in the 2024 fiscal year. And that bottom number is just what we've already borrowed to date, which if you work it out per month, you're looking at a number of 2.8, 2.9 trillion. How do we keep missing the number by $1 trillion? Is that part of the scam? Is that part of the game? is say, hey, we're going to give a number of prediction, and that's what all the talking heads on television, radio, and the newspapers and the really diligent press around here fixate on, because it's in their little book, and they're not paying attention that every day, that first board I showed you, you can go onto the Treasury's website and do the math yourself and see where we're actually at. And part of one of the drivers is nothing you get to vote on here. It is the continuation of rising interest rates. So I've had to adjust this. And understand, today's 10 years, I think, was at 4.3. So this is the blend interest rate, which means, let's see if I can make this make sense. So you have a country with about $34.5 trillion of borrowing. But it's really closer to 27, 28 trillion is sold to the public. The rest of that is borrowed internally. What is sold to the public has a couple factors on it. It's duration. Hey, they sold a 6-month. They sold a 1 year. They sold a 5-year. They sold a 10-year. They sold a 30-year. These are bonds. These are notes. These are paper. There's just different names for the different durations. And some were sold years ago when interest rates were basically close to zero. This year, in the 2024 year, with the new issuances of bonds because of our current borrowing, and then the refinancing of old, there's about $10 trillion that gets subject to the new interest rates. So as bonds are rolling off, and then you saw when we had that stressed bond auction, what was it, last November, where the market makers had to buy 24% of it? And a couple of weeks later, Treasury rolls out and says, hey, maybe we're just going to start selling shorter on the curve, because at least that way we know we have the demand, but yes, we're going to pay higher premiums on it. So every couple of weeks, we get the calculation of what our interest load is, and it keeps ticking up on us. And I'm going to show a couple boards here. And look, interest on outstanding debt, the non-negotiable is the debt internally. Publicly held is right now about 3.259 and may continue to tick up as they go shorter on the curve. I know this is geeky. If you don't like math, please go watch something else. But we're selling more and more of our debt short because there's demand there, but that interest, we are paying a premium. And then you want to know why the debt and borrowing keeps going up. It's about how we're financing. And what that ends up creating is this situation here where my predictions, and I'll take responsibility if I'm wrong, because understand my darkness is about $800 billion to almost $1 trillion over what our Congressional Budget Office says, what Office of Management Budget said, but so far I've been right. I also look at it every single day where they put out a number and then several months go by. We're right now on track for coming in over 2.8 trillion borrowing. And remember, I just showed you an economic magazine saying, wow, isn't it amazing how healthy the U.S. economy is? How do you borrow close to $3 trillion? That's a gross number. That's both publicly borrowed and internal borrowing. How do you borrow close to $3 trillion when the economy is good? Need you to think about this, because tax collections are not that far off from the historical average. When we've had very high marginal rates, when we've had very low marginal rates, we're always there about that 17.5, 18.5, sometimes as high as 19% of the economy comes in as taxes. Does this let you know there's something structural out there? And it's the dirty little secret that we all know, but we're afraid to say because it gets us unelected. We tell the truth about where the drivers are. 100% of U.S. borrowing from today through the next 30 years will be interest, healthcare, and if 8 or 9 years when the Social Security Trust Fund is emptied out and we decide whether we're going to let the immorality of doubling senior poverty in America, seniors taking a 25% cut, Or do we backfill it with general fund revenues? And if we do that, those three things are 100% of the borrowing for the next 30 years. Everything else is modeled to be pretty flat. Matter of fact, general fund, and related to discretionary, actually has a slightly positive over the 30 years. We got old. It's demographics. We're not supposed to say that around here because we might hurt someone's feelings, but understand, and I brought the charts here a couple weeks ago with the update on fertility rates. In 15 years, this country has more deaths than births. What are we doing to plan for that? What are we doing to plan for the reality? We're heading towards a time where we're going to have about 2.3, 2.4 workers for every person in retirement on Social Security. We know it's coming. It's not a black swan. It's what they nickname a white swan. It means you see it and you still don't do anything about it because we're too busy knifing each other with rhetoric that doesn't make mathematical sense because it's good politics. And now we've done the updates again, and our latest update is no longer this year fitting just interest in this year. I want to say this in a way where I get it fairly accurate. Our latest model says interest in the 2024 fiscal year will be $1,076 billion. When I came here a couple months ago and said, we could be heading for a $1 trillion, I got mocked by even some of my colleagues. Schweikert, you've got to stop making things up. Well, turns out I'm right. But, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, why don't we take it seriously? We sit here and fight over, it's real money we fight over, but in the same day, we will spend all day fighting over a few million here, which is important, and I'm fine. I'm willing to cut these things. But we're picking up pennies off the ground as the avalanche is crushing us. Because that same day we fought over those millions, we borrowed $8, $9 billion that day when we were fighting over millions. And understand, millions has a lot of different, a trillion has 12 zeros. Start to work your zeros and understand the scale. So, I just put up this slide just because this is our prediction slide, but also to make another point. Here's how spending will work this year, just so people understand the hierarchy. Social Security, we expect $1.45 trillion to go out the door. This is an earned benefit. You worked in America, you paid your FICA tax. If you worked your 40 quarters, you maxed out. But you earned this. The next biggest spend in your government isn't coming from a running tax and trust fund, it's borrowing. And both net and gross. The difference there, once again, is net is just the interest we pay out the door to people that bought our bonds. Gross is also because we owe interest to Social Security and Medicare and all the other trust funds. Both are coming in as the second biggest expense in the U.S. government. Number 3, Medicare. Number 4 is now defense. How many people, if you and I walked down the street and said, hey, what's the number 1 spend in the U.S. government? What's the number 2? Would they say interest is the number 2 expense in this government? And if you think interest rates are about to crash down to where they were the last decade, remember the last decade was a fantasy. We're just now getting back. If you take a look, if you remove sort of the previous decade with the value of money manipulation and interest rates, if you remove that, look at the 35-year average. We're not even high enough to be in the 35-year average yet. The fantasy has to come to an end here. This is reality. And this is one of my continuing frustrations, is I keep looking like CBO. We try to work with them. They do their best. They have to operate with, hey, here's the GDP growth they expected. Here's where Treasury tells them what receipts are going to come in. We call tax revenues receipts. That's the proper term. And then, but over and over and over, we keep missing the numbers. And when you start missing your numbers by $1 trillion, Makes the job a little tricky when the people you rely on, the data you rely on, because we missed how high interest rates. Remember last October, everyone, oh, Fed's going to start cutting. And inflation the last 2 months really hasn't gone down. This isn't a non sequitur, it ties in. We suffer inflation because we spent too much money. Even the left-wing academic studies from last year, which wanted to blame supply chain, had that as part of it, but some of them said as much as half was supply chain. Some said it's only about 40%, but supply chains are fixed. Here we are a couple years later. How are we still running hot again? We are paying the price for spending money in ways that did not actually spike productivity. When you subsidize things, do you get the most efficient, the cheapest, the best way to produce them? It doesn't work that way. You need to make it so there's a level of competition that the best, fastest product and the reinvestment in your capital. So it's the difference between supply side and sort of the Keynesian investments. And now you've seen both. You saw productivity gains with the tax reform, and now you've seen what happened with inflation reduction, where you got inflation. And now the last 2 months, it hasn't been going down the way it's supposed to. So expect these interest rates I just showed you to continue. And if you live in my neighborhood, if you live in the Scottsdale, Phoenix area, wonderful area, absolutely incredibly beautiful this time of year, and from January 21 till last month, actually 2 months ago, if you're not making 23.6% more, you are poorer today than you were in that January 21. You want to know why people are cranky? Understand how many of our brothers and sisters around the country, particularly in the working class, you are poorer today. In my area, if you're not making 23.6% more than that January 21 date, you are poorer today. And look, we want to go down the rabbit hole. Part of the idea of stabilizing debt, when someone says, we're going to go pay it all off, really? Let's see, the debt basically equals the entire size of this economy. Just the debt. You're going to go pay it off? From an economic standpoint, right now, be joyful if we could just stabilize it. That means the growth of the debt can only grow as fast as we are being productive as a society, as the growth of this economy. But right now, you have a problem. In 2023, at that time, and this is publicly held debt, this isn't my gross debt, we borrowed $2.6 trillion from the public, and the estimate is the economy grew about 1.5. But it's that delta that kills you until you squeeze those two back together. So you only grow debt at the pace you grow the economy. That's stability. And then maybe you can get some more discipline, adoption of technologies and better ways to do things, and you start to separate those so you can start to pay down that principal, because the interest doesn't buy you anything. All right, I'm not going to make you have to deal with some of these. All right, now here's where you light yourself. How do I say this nicely? Here's where I hurt people's feelings. Remember how a little moment ago I was trying to explain the primary drivers of U.S. sovereign debt? I need to update this board because the 30-year number was $116 trillion of borrowing, and that's from a year or two ago. Our best math right now is close to $130 trillion of borrowing over the next 30 years. So, if you're still a decade from retirement and you think you're going to live another 20 years, you've got to understand the sort of dystopian level of what we're going to have to do to the U.S. dollar, to your savings, to those things. You don't think this is going to crush your retirement? How about me? I accept I'm an old dad, but I have a 20-month-old and I have an 8-year-old. Do they deserve to have prosperity? Understand, my little boy when he is 23 years old, I believe is the number, U.S. taxes, every U.S. tax has to be double what it is today just to cover projected spending. And that's baseline spending. That's no war, no recession, no pandemic, just baseline. So if any of you plan to be around here in 20-some years, are you prepared to have your taxes doubled? That's the math. I mean, I know this is a math-free zone, but at least some point I'm pitching to your self-interest. Do you care? And it doesn't have to be that way. There are solutions. But the hard part of this board is trying to explain to people 100% of the borrowing that's coming over the next 30 years. Medicare, if we backfill Social Security when the trust fund is gone in 8, 9 years, and interest that we're paying on these. The rest of the budget actually has a slightly positive balance, meaning it comes in under its growth curve, underneath the projected receipts. And now we're going to talk about first understanding one of the key problems in our society, and then we're going to try to think a couple thought experiments. Can we be creative to understand the problem and be disruptive? What could we do to have a healthier, more prosperous society? Well, one of the first things is you got to understand some of the things that are wrong here. The U.S. is an outlier in disease and disability trends. Or, for some reason, we are dramatically sicker than much of the rest of the industrialized world. Okay, it's just math. We have the data. You're all smart, at least if you're punishing yourself enough to watch an idiot like me talk, you got to be either interested or not have a life. But somewhere here you understand here, there's something wrong in the U.S. We are sicker than much of the rest of the world. And the fact of the matter is, you just saw a chart that I was showing that healthcare costs are the primary driver of U.S. debt. Okay, so let's actually walk through. So what are the good things? What could we do? What could we do to disrupt that? There's a couple of amazing articles from a couple of years ago for my Democrat colleagues who tell me how important taking on income inequality is. Really interesting abstract studies that sort of say, is it education? Yeah, that's a big play. Turns out health was it was actually above everything else in the disparity of creating income inequality. Urban poor, my tribal poor in a place like Arizona, rural poor. And you look at it, and when diabetes is 33% of all of our healthcare spend in America, why doesn't this place go nuts in trying to fix diabetes? Instead, what we did something that's absolutely absurd. So in the Inflation Reduction Act, they take $16 billion, give it to the very big pharma that they complain about that was gouging on insulin. At the same time, 75 miles from here, there's a co-op making 3 brands of generic insulin cheaper than the subsidized price. Why wouldn't we take a fraction of that money and put it into saying, we want competition, we want everyone battling to give us the best product and the best prices. I'm going to show a weird little technology just as part of the thought experiment. But instead, they subsidized the very big pharma that they complained about was gouging people. And then you crushed the competition and was trying to come in cheaper because now they can't compete against the subsidized price. This is the absurdity of this place. We need more of this. There's finally, you start to see the curve. There's finally, because of some of the breakthroughs in synthetic biology, we're going to talk a little bit about AI. The artificial intelligence is about to have a revolution in bringing cures to market dramatically faster. Dramatically faster. We've actually now had the first couple AI drugs designed to make it through the FDA. As you know, 6 weeks ago, we had the first genetic drug cure sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell. And what we learned from that technology, there's more coming. How do we make it possible that it doesn't take $100 million or $1 billion to bring one of these drugs to market when we now have the ability to crunch data in ways that we were never able to do before, to understand efficacy and safety and effectiveness? We could do it by policy. Is that Republican or Democrat, or is that just sort of joining into this century? This is a wonderful chart trying to just point out the capital markets are starting to spend money in places to cure people. I will argue one of the most moral things we could do, and one of the most powerful things we could do for U.S. sovereign debt, make Americans much less sick. Now, this is where I'll get some really nasty comments. Almost half, and I've brought the charts and the reports and the academic studies. So if diabetes is 33% of all spending, half of human diseases, so there's 3,000 plus human conditions, half of them are related to obesity. Do we think about things we could do in farm policy and nutrition policy, in helping our brothers and sisters live better, healthier, more prosperous, ability to join into the labor force, maybe family formation, crushing income inequality? Is that Republican or Democrat? Yes, it will really, really annoy a whole bunch of incumbent business models that need sick people. But even they have souls. We're on the cusp of miracles. Why aren't we doing this? You know, poor health reduces labor force participation. This is an absurd chart, except for the fact this is from Goldman Sachs. And they were just doing this thought experiment. These semaglutides, which I think there's a generic one that's going to be here in May. There's a couple great articles if you want to go, use your favorite search engine, about some small molecule versions that will cost dramatically less to make, and they're coming. There's going to be competition. The prices are coming down. These are these GLP-1s. But they were just doing the thought experiment of what would happen. What would happen if all of a sudden we started to get healthier as a society? Okay, is that Republican or Democrat? Be the most powerful thing we could do for U.S. sovereign debt? Are we ready to step up and take on the armies of lobbyists here who are upset with us every time we come up with... Do you remember when we were trying to do telehealth? Before the pandemic, telehealth was one of the most lobbied against technologies in Washington, D.C. And then the pandemic hit, and it turns out people had figured out how to work their phone. Believe in the American people. Stop treating them like children, but also stop coddling those who make money off of our illnesses. So let's actually take a look. This was fascinating. And once again, I want to thank Joint Economic Republican staff for being willing to go down the rabbit hole, talk to the Goldman Sachs economists, and try to understand how they got these numbers. The basic pitch here is they were trying to figure out if there was a wider use and accessibility for the semaglutides, the GLP-1s. These are the hormone molecules your gut produces to tell you you're full, and it helped reduce diabetes, helped reduce obesity in America. They were actually coming up that it actually had a substantial effect on growing the economy. It actually increased GDP. It's at least worth thinking about. This is the thought experiment portion of this program. Think about it. So if I came to you tomorrow, actually today, let's just do it right now, and said, I need something from you we could roll out, and in the next 6 months, we could have a major effect on reducing U.S. spending. Okay, I have all sorts of things I could cut. I know my brothers and sisters on the left, they would want to raise taxes on people, but I need a policy that you could have a major effect. We have multiple academic studies that make it clear that about 16% of U.S. healthcare spending is people actually not adhering to their drugs. So someone like me, can you believe I have high blood pressure? As long as I take my calcium inhibitor, I don't stroke out. You know, it's a pill that costs, in many ways, it's pennies. It's been off patent for decades and decades and decades. As long as I do my drug adherence, 16% of U.S. healthcare spending is people not adhering to their pharmaceutical policy, or whatever the bright way to say that. You do realize 16% of U.S. healthcare spending is close to $600 billion. What if you got a third of that? What if I came to you and said, hey, we can get $200 billion of savings and make our brothers and sisters healthier, maybe a few of them dying? Well, it turns out there are crazy, simple little things, like the pill bottle cap that just beeps at you if you don't open it in the morning. And it's like 99 cents. How many of us have a phone that, you know, the pharmacy, the doctor's office, however you want to do it, could beep at you in the morning and say, hey, remember, it's that time, you should really do this. It's not the way this place thinks. This place thinks about subsidies, giveaways. So remember, the Obamacare, ACA, was a finance bill. It was who had to pay and who got subsidized, and then how much federal money also went into subsidies. It was a financing package. The Republican alternative was a financing package. Medicare for All is a financing bill. How about the revolution of thought? Why don't we change what we pay by making our brothers and sisters healthier, or maybe curing some things? So this is one of the simplest thought experiments I can give you. If U.S. healthcare, 16% of it is people not engaging in adherence, why not take that on? Is that Republican or Democrat? Or is that just the adoption of technology? Is it just trying to be creative? Look, there's other quirky things, and this is more my personal fascination. I actually am blessed to have a couple staffers who are doing experiments with some of the different wearables that actually can use the data to help them stay healthier, to find out their bodies, because the beauty of you get data off you for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it starts to tell you things. Oh, when I ate that, my body didn't like it. Oh, when I slept this way, my body did like it. These have crashed in price. There's even some health insurance companies now that are working with you saying, will you do a wearable? Look, a couple years ago, I came here, I met a material science professor who had come up with this thing, and we always joked, we called it the flu kazoo. It was something you blew into, it was a breath biopsy. It could almost tell you within a couple minutes, a couple moments, you had a certain type category of virus. It could bang off your health records, and then could order your antivirals. Would that help us? Would that make us healthier? Would that cut down the cycle time so you don't wait in the waiting room? Yes, except the problem is in most places that technology would be illegal because it would be the algorithm writing a prescription. And every time I say this, I will get someone that says, David, we're going to try to run ads against you because we make money writing prescriptions. I'm just trying to make America healthier, and I'm trying to find a way to take down the debt so we don't crush ourselves. The adoption of technology that if it's as accurate, and statistically a model like that is more accurate than you and I can be as humans. Why don't we promote it? Why don't we allow people the freedom to take care of themselves with using technology? All right, now here's a crazy one, and I'm going to do this one just because it amused me. Remember how a couple minutes ago I was complaining about Democrats and the way they approached insulin because it was a great campaign issue, but it was technologically vacuous? So here's one. How about if you'd taken a couple of dollars or just actually helped this? So it turns out they have succeeded at doing a DNA tweak to some cattle, and the cattle will produce insulin at a fraction of the price. And you could actually do different tweaks for different types of insulin. I'm just starting to read the academic article, but it exists. These are quirky solutions. And when you have debates around here, it becomes a debate of, give away money or give away more money. It's not embrace something that disrupts and makes people healthier and actually at the same time doesn't blow up the U.S. debt and deficits. You can be moral and also have a fiscal brain around here. It just requires some literacy. Maybe along being a math-free zone, we don't read things. I subscribe to a lot of crazy journals, so I come up with this stuff. I guess my reason for the thought experiment, Mr. Speaker, we're in real trouble. There is hope. But the hope only works if this body finds some way to think differently. I yield back.